Hello and welcome. I'm Thomas Porteous and you're watching NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top stories this hour. Charlie Kirk's widow speaks for the first time, promising his legacy will never die as she mourns with their 2 young children. She declares her cries will echo like a battle cry, while suspect Tyler Robinson remains in custody after a 33-hour manhunt. The General Assembly overwhelmingly votes for a declaration calling for a tangible and time-bound steps towards an Israeli-Palestinian 2-state solution. The text follows a July conference hosted by Saudi Arabia and France, with the United States and Israel boycotting the process. Qatar's Prime Minister holds talks with President Donald Trump in New York following Israel's strike on Doha that killed a Qatari official and 5 Hamas members. Sheikh Mohammed has launched a diplomatic push in the US after the attack, targeting a meeting on Trump's proposed Gaza ceasefire deal. President Ramchandra Pudel calls fresh polls after deadly protests forced Prime Minister Oli to resign and pave the way for Nepal's first female leader. Former Chief Justice Shinshila Karki is appointed interim Prime Minister as Gen Z anti-graft demonstrations shake Nepal's political order. Tommy Robinson uses Charlie Kirk's killing to galvanise support ahead of Britain's biggest far-right rally in decades, featuring speakers from Europe and the US. Steve Bannon is listed to appear alongside other far-right figures, while questions remain over whether Jordan Peterson will attend. Auckland sees its biggest pro-Palestinian march since the Gaza war began, with organisers claiming 50,000 attendees. Police put the crowd closer to 20,000 as demonstrators flooded central Auckland for the March for Humanity. Yemen's Houthis say they fired a ballistic missile with a cluster warhead at sensitive targets in Tel Aviv overnight. Israeli defense officials report the missile was intercepted, while the IDF has not confirmed the details of the warhead. A magnitude 7.4 earthquake strikes off Russia's far east coast, shaking the Kamchatka region, with no tsunami threat reported. Scientists report differing readings, with the US survey measuring 39 kilometers deep and German experts putting it at just 10. We start this hour in West Asia, where the Houthis in Yemen have claimed responsibility for an overnight ballistic missile attack on Israel, stating that the projectile targeted multiple sensitive targets in Tel Aviv and was equipped with a cluster bomb warhead. This comes as the Israel Defense Forces have confirmed that the missile was successfully intercepted by air defenses. However, according to reports, there has been no official comment from the IDF regarding the claim about the cluster bomb warhead. The Iran-backed Houthis have reportedly launched several missiles equipped with these cluster bomb warheads at Israel in recent weeks. No injuries or damage have been reported, however. The attack did trigger sirens in Tel Aviv and several towns and communities across central Israel. We're now joined by our guest, Yossi Kapawasa, and he is an Israeli intelligence and security expert, and he joins us live from Tel Aviv. Thank you very much, Yossi, for joining us on the program. Yossi, we of course report these missiles that get fired from Yemen's Houthis on a near daily basis. However, what is this cluster warhead that they are speaking about, and what are its capabilities?
Well, the cluster warhead can hit simultaneously several targets, and once it separates from the main missile, it is more difficult to intercept it because you have several cluster bombs flying in your direction simultaneously. So this is, of course, a new level of threat from Iran through the Houthis in Yemen. And we have to be prepared to deal with that too. The best way to do that is to hit the target, hit the missile before it separates the warheads. And that's probably what happened tonight. And because of that, it's difficult for the IDF to verify whether it was cluster had cluster warhead or not. It's not known because it was probably hit before the bombs were separated.
The Houthis, of course, are an Iran-backed proxy, Yossi, that you've just mentioned. What are their military capabilities in a more general sense, and how much of a threat do they show to the state of Israel?
Well, they are a threat. They keep launching missiles at our direction. They keep preventing the shipping of Israeli products and Israeli vessels through the Bab-el-Mandeb Straits. And this is definitely a threat for Israel. When such a missile is launched in our direction, millions of people in Israel go to the shelters, and they are very proud of the fact that they managed to force millions of people to go to the shelters in the middle of the night. It was 4 o'clock in the morning, a little bit earlier than that, 3:45. And that's not only a nuisance, it's also a threat, because just a couple of days ago, they managed through a drone that they launched many drones simultaneously to the missiles. They managed through a drone to hit the terminal in one of our airports, civilian airport. And this is definitely a threat that we have to deal with. We try to hit the Houthis and charge them with a heavy price for what they're doing. Israeli airstrikes are happening quite often recently. In Yemen, we have to remember this is very far away from Israel, but nevertheless, we managed to reach them. And we hit all kinds of infrastructure that is used for military purposes and military targets in Yemen. So far, it's not enough in order to convince them to stop. And, Iran somehow manages to keep shipping them all kinds of weapons that they use against us. And it's an ongoing circle that is not yet being solved. It seems that we have to charge them with a heavier price, because the price we've charged them so far is not enough in order to convince them to stop.
Yes, and Yossi, the Houthis often claim that when they fire these projectiles, it is in solidarity with Palestinians. Are these strikes merely symbolic?
In this context, they're totally symbolic. They don't change anything when it comes to the Palestinian-Israeli conflict and the war in Gaza. Nobody, not the Palestinians, neither Israel, is affected by what the Houthis do. And with all due respect to their claim of having an impact on through the solidarity with the Palestinians and the way the war is being fought, this has nothing to do with the reality. The reality is that we have a problem with Hamas, and we want to see them disarmed and releasing the hostages. And they refuse to do that, of course. And so that's why the war goes on, and not because of the actions by Hamas, by the Houthis.
Yossi Kapawasa, thank you very much for speaking to us here on the programme. Always a pleasure to talk to you. We now move on, and US President Donald Trump says imposing tariffs on India over its purchase of Russian oil is not an easy thing to do, admitting it creates tensions between the two nations. In a Fox and Friends interview, Trump said he placed a 50% tariff on India due to its continued oil trade with Russia, calling it a big deal that has caused a rift. Trump also claimed he had resolved several global conflicts during his second term, including those in the Congo, Rwanda, and even between Pakistan and India. Meanwhile, India has defended its Russian oil imports, saying its decisions are driven by national interest and market dynamics. Trump's ambassador nominee to India, Sergio Gore, emphasized that the administration wants India to buy American oil instead, citing India's growing middle class as a key market. US Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick added that a trade deal with India could progress once it halts its Russian oil imports. Let's take a listen in to what the US president had to say on the issue.
Look, India was their biggest customer. I put a 50% tariff on India because they're buying oil from Russia. That's not an easy thing to do. That's a big deal. And it causes a rift with India.
We're now joined by Dr. Ajay Jua. He's a former Secretary of Commerce and a senior economist, and he joins us live from New Delhi. Dr. Jua, thank you very much for taking the time to speak to us here on the programme. Dr. Jua, of course, these 50% tariffs are significant, especially when India and United States relations previous to the second Trump presidency seemed to be very strong. How have you analysed the impact of these tariffs, and also, of course, Donald Trump's synopsis on India's purchase on Russian oil, and how that might impact future negotiations?
Thank you for having me. I think the 50% tariffs on India, probably a little more than 50% actually, because on 100 we are paying another 25% is the basic tariff. So on 125, another 25 gets added, which comes to close to about 157, 158%. The question is that math apart, the question is, it is hurting India. There is no doubt about it. It's been on for 3 weeks, the higher tariffs of 25%, and for about 2 weeks, the higher tariffs of 50% itself, which came into effect from the 27th or 28th of August. New orders upon India are taking cognizance of the fact that such duties are liable to be paid by the importers. So India's competitiveness vis-a-vis its peers is getting impacted, and certainly it is something which India is able to manage for the time being, but unless these are revisited, it could cause a fair amount of diversion of trade from India to other countries, and as well as in the short term itself impact the production and the employment in the labor-intensive industries, which are more prone to be hit. Or roughly speaking, about $30 to $35 billion worth of Indian exports to the US out of the 86 billion which we had last year are likely to be impacted. Whether they will come down to zero or they will take a hit, and in which case it is about 20 to 25 billion of the tariffs get impacted. The question about oil imports from the US, crude oil, India is open to that idea. I don't think India has ever said that we are not going to be buying the crude oil from the US. All that we are seeking is let it be competitively priced. If we get the price, if we get from another source cheaper, and we have to look at the whole cost, including the transportation cost from the US to the Indian ports, we would be happy to buy from the US. We have said that in the past, and that continues to be our stand even today. Second, we have taken measures in order to progress our bilateral discussions with the US, which were interrupted on the 25th of August last year, when the team which was to come from the US was not dispatched. We have kind of taken action, and a major port in India on the western Mundra, where about 10% of the imported crude oil was coming and feeding the refineries in northern India, that has declared that it will not be dealing with any sanctioned imports. That means the imports from Russia fall in that category, and those will probably have to go to another port, not to the major port of Mundra or any of its satellite ports. It has 7 or 8 ports under its umbrella. The Adani is a free trade zone. So in all those 7 or 8 of them, I think we will not be importing the Russian oil.
Yes, Dr. Dewar, this comes as Scott Bessent, US Treasury Secretary, has called upon G7 nations and the European Union, all of which are very strong supporters of Ukraine, apart from the United States, to also impose tariffs on that of China and that of India. How if these countries do follow what the US says, how much could that hurt the Indian economy as well?
Certainly, the European Union, which has most of the other G7 countries as its members, and the appeal from President Trump's administration is to all the G7 members to impose these secondary tariffs on India for importing from Russia, for continuing to import crude oil from Russia, I think will impact India. Our trade with the European Union is about higher than our trade with the US, $135 billion last year. Our imports probably from there are much more than we have the imports from the US. So, but these tariffs are on the exports, as you know, to that extent, a little less than the impact than it is on the tariffs imposed by the US, because our exports to the EU are a little less. But nevertheless, we would get impacted, and I think the G7 countries are, as of now, holding up because they realize that the European Union itself has been using Russian oil, importing energy from there, particularly of gas, which goes all the way through the pipelines built from Russia to as far as Germany. And as the winter is approaching, EU countries would need to have this oil flow maintained. So I'm not sure whether President Trump's appeal would be heeded to by them of imposing 100% tariff on the crude oil on India as well as China.
Yes, Dr. Ajay Jua, thank you very much for joining us here on the program and taking the time. We stay in the Indo-Pacific for our next story, where North Korean leader Kim Jong-un has announced plans to advance both nuclear and conventional military capabilities. The new dual policy is expected to be unveiled at the upcoming 9th Congress of the Workers' Party of Korea. According to state media, Kim made the remarks during recent inspections of weapons research centers, stressing the importance of building both nuclear forces and conventional arms simultaneously. On Friday, he also oversaw a sniper shooting drill, a move that highlights Pyongyang's ongoing focus on military readiness. These domestic activities follow Kim's high-profile trip to Beijing, where he met with Chinese President Xi Jinping and Russian President Vladimir Putin, a visit that has elevated his international profile ahead of the key party meeting. We are now joined by Dr. Sanjay Kumar. He is a journalist and he works for the Korea Herald, and he's joining us live from Seoul. Thank you very much, Dr. Kumar, for joining us here on the program. Dr. Kumar, North Korea and their military is always at the forefront of their public image. How do you see their military moving forward in both a nuclear and just their conventional military capabilities, which is the only media we usually seem to come out of the sanctioned country?
Well, this military policy of Pyongyang is not a new one. It is in the public since decades, and especially the long-held military doctrine of Byongjin is coming out once again. We can see in that way to modernize the warfare tactics and conventional as well as the nuclear forces. So this Byongjin extension, we should see it in that way. But yes, it is also a follow-up to what has been decided and announced in 2021 Congress when they vowed to have spy satellites and solid fuel ICBMs. So now I think North Korea wants to leverage their relationship with Russia, where they have sent 15,000 troops, according to media reports and some other sources in Seoul and Europe. So this should be seen as an extension of not only just Byongjin, but as well as what they were trying to do from 2021 Congress announcement.
Yes, and Dr. Kumar, what exactly is North Korea's objective here in building up its military? Of course, it's a very isolated country. No one really knows what goes on there. However, why do they put out these shows and signs of military strength?
Well, they had been following this Juche ideology of self-reliance, and Byungjin had been their main philosophy of military. Their doctrine is centered around this too. But ideally, their military thinks that wars are fought and won on the ground. And when they see military exercises from US, ROK, Japan alliance, they want to give a very practical message and practical way of tackling with the military ground. And that is why they keep spending not only monetary wise, but also on the ground tactics. And recently, warfares have changed. The recent warfares we can see in Gaza, in Russia-Ukraine war. So it looks like North Korea is very well aware right now, and they want to modernize it, especially when it comes to spy satellites. And like Russian technology is still like very much up to date. So they want to take leverage of it, and they are trying to build the military which can at least protect the regime of Pyongyang. We can see in that way.
Yes, and Dr. Kumar, what's the feeling from South Korea? Of course, President Lee Jae-myung actually campaigned on a wanting of easing of tensions in the Korean peninsula. What are the feelings there when video footage comes out like this and you get information like this just north of the border?
Well, South Korea has always denounced this kind of military expansion of the north. The ideology remains same here among the public as well as the political and the government, that North Korea must be denuclearized. But you know that these things looks very difficult from North Korean perspective. But the new government in South Korea is trying to bring a peaceful coexistence kind of situation here. And recently, when President Lee Jae-myung and President Trump, when they met, when Trump said that he wants to be he just is a peacemaker, but President Lee Jae-myung responded with he wants to be pacemaker. So that pace from South Korea perspective looks in the direction of denuclearization, as well as, if not denuclearization, at least peaceful coexistence of inter-Korean relations and the entire Korean peninsula. So South Korean people, they are tired of these military exercises, not only in South Korea, but North Korea and entire region. So if you ask me, the common people's perspective, they want a very, here people have faced the hardships of war, and they know what exactly war is. So South Koreans are very peaceful people. Even foreign residents here also, they don't want any kind of escalation or conflict. They want North Korea to be peaceful, if not denuclearized, and South Korea also to be not engaged in this kind of military capability enhancement. Yeah.
Yes, Dr. Sanjay Kumar, thank you very much for giving us your insight on that and taking the time to speak to us. Now let's turn to the African continent now, where the United States, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates and Egypt are calling for a 3-month humanitarian truce in Sudan. They say it must be followed by a permanent ceasefire. The 4 countries say there is no military solution and the suffering is unacceptable. They are pushing for a 9-month transition to civilian rule. They have influence over both the Sudanese army and the Rapid Support Forces. The 2 sides have fought a devastating war that has created the, quote, world's worst humanitarian crisis, according to the United Nations. Famine is spreading, especially in the region of Darfur, and the RSF still controls most of that region and is laying siege to Al-Fashir. The Quad also rejected any role for the Muslim Brotherhood or allied groups in Sudan. And in a new move, Washington has sanctioned Sudan's finance minister, Jibril Ibrahim, and an Islamist militia backing the army. We now move on and over to South Asia, where Nepal is slowly recovering after days of deadly anti-corruption protests that left at least 51 people dead and over 1,000 injured. The protests forced Prime Minister KP Sharma Oli to resign on September the 9th. In the aftermath, former Supreme Court Chief Justice Sushila Karki has been sworn in as Nepal's interim Prime Minister, becoming the first woman to ever hold the role. Her appointment has raised hopes for a corruption-free future. As Kathmandu begins to return to normalcy, grieving families, including that of 30-year-old Santosh Bishwakarma, one of the 51 victims who died in the protests, are left to mourn. His widow, Amika Bishwakarma, expressed grief and wishes the sacrifices of the people don't go to waste. Let's listen in to what they said.
बलिदानै दिइसक्नु भयो अब जे भए पनि यो नाबालखा छोराछोरीलाई अब जे भए नि एउटा बाउ भएको भए त यिनीहरुको सपना त पूरा गर्दिनु हुन्थ्यो नि उले जसरी भए पनि आफ्नो ज्यान जस्तो सुकै धरपमा राखेर भए पनि उसले त नानीहरुको त जे भए नि सपना पूरा गर्दिनु हुन्थ्यो र पनि अब उले देशको लागि त बलिदान दिनु भयो तर उनीहरुले मेरो नानीहरुको चाहिँ सपना पूरा गर्दिनु पर्छ हैन अब कतिसम्म पढ्छन् अब जे होस् उ गर्ने नै मान्छे हिँडेपछि त गराइ त दिनु पर्यो नि त मलाई त अब केही न केही बाटो त देखाइदिनु पर्यो नि यसरी गरी खा त यो ब्लाइन्डले चल भनेर त देखाउनु पर्यो नि अब देखाउने मान्छे नै नभएपछि त कसरी गरी खाने उसको सपना के थियो भने उले अगाडि देखि नै म देशको लागि भनेपछि जसरी पनि म चिनाउँछु र म चिनेरै मर्छु म सारा नेपालीको लागि म चिनेरै मतलब यो फलानु कुकुर मरे कहिले पनि म मर्दिन भन्नु पहिलादेखि कुनै पार्टीको मान्छे पनि हैन कुनै नेतामा चलेको मान्छे पनि होइन उ कुनै मतलब अहिलेसम्म उले कसैलाई भोट पनि लगाउनु भएको थिएन म काहीँ गएर केही गर्न सक्दिन मतलब यिनीहरुलाई नै पढाउने हो राम्रो शिक्षा दीक्षा दिने हो भोलि गएर यिनीहरुले नै केही गरेर मलाई अब मतलब बाबाको इच्छा उनीहरुले नै पूरा गर्छन् पछि गएर अब जे होस् बाउको सपना त आदिमै चकनाचुर बनाइदिहालो सरकारले अब गएर छोराछोरीको चाहिँ त्यस्तो नबनाइदियोस्.
Well, that is all that we have time for, but we will continue to bring you more news updates from around the world.